On May 8, 1902, a volcano in the Caribbean killed 30,000 people in under 2 minutes. Scientists watching from a distance described it as instantaneous. The city of Saint-Pierre, once called the Paris of the Caribbean, ceased to exist before 9 a.m. Only 2 people inside the city survived. The governor had received warnings for weeks. He ignored every single one. There was an election in 3 days. Saint-Pierre, perched on Martinique's northern coast, was the beating heart of French colonial ambition in the Caribbean. By 1902, census rolls counted 23,000 permanent residents, but the city's true pulse ran hotter. Its cobbled streets bustled with merchants, dock workers, and visiting traders drawn by a port that rivaled any in the Antilles. The harbor's tax books recorded a constant churn of sugar, rum, and coffee, exports that filled the city's warehouses and lined the pockets of its elite. Ships from Bordeaux and Marseille jostled for space beside local schooners, their holds stuffed with barrels of aged rum destined for Europe. Behind the grandeur, Saint-Pierre's prosperity reached deep into daily life. The sugar and rum trade employed thousands, from the owners of sprawling plantations to the laborers who loaded sacks at dawn. Cafes and theaters hosted soirees that echoed Parisian style, earning the city its nickname, the Paris of the Caribbean. Theaters staged operas in French, and the city's market overflowed with goods brought in from across the island and beyond. Wealth poured into public works, stone churches, ornate government buildings, and a grand promenade along the seafront. The city's elite dined on imported delicacies and debated politics at the Club Colonial, while workers and artisans crowded the narrow lanes behind the market, carving out their own slice of the city's fortune. Even as the volcano loomed overhead, the idea of abandoning such a city seemed unthinkable. Saint-Pierre was not just a place to live. It was the symbol of Martinique's promise and France's pride in the tropics. In every ledger and every crowded street, the city's worth was measured not just in francs, but in the lives and ambitions of those who called it home. Memories of past eruptions shaped every conversation in Saint-Pierre. In 1792, Mount Pelée sent a plume of ash into the sky, dusting rooftops and fields, but left the city untouched. Again in 1851, the volcano rumbled and spat cinders, but the worst that came was a thin gray coat on the sugarcane and a few days of anxious prayers. Parish chronicles from those years recorded the events in calm, almost routine language. The mountain grumbled, the people endured. Newspapers published retrospectives that praised the city's resilience, turning each eruption into a story of survival and luck. By 1902, these stories had hardened into a civic myth. Pelée threatened but never struck. Elders recalled the way ash had fallen like snow, only to be swept away by the next rain. Children listened as parents described how the city's stone walls and the faith of its people had always proven enough. The last serious trouble was 50 years behind them, and Saint-Pierre had only grown richer, busier, more self-assured in the shadow of the mountain. When new warnings arrived, sulfur in the air, dead birds on the riverbank, a faint tremor underfoot, most shrugged. The volcano had always given its warnings, and the city had always survived. Even as parish registers began to fill with odd notations, unusual fumes, ashfall on the altar steps, the collective memory insisted that danger was temporary and flight unnecessary. With each passing day, the old narrative of endurance softened public demand for any drastic action, making it easier for officials to reassure and harder for anyone to imagine that this time the outcome could be different. By early April, the air above Saint-Pierre carried a sharp, choking tang. The air was poisoned. Sulfur dioxide readings from the Observatoire de la Martinique shot past 200 parts per million, nearly 7 times the normal background. Parish registers and veterinary ledgers began to fill with grim entries. Cattle and goats found dead in the fields, chickens suffocated in their coops, horses collapsing near the riverbanks. On April 8th, scientists logged the first significant seismic tremors beneath Mount Pelée, then watched as the readings grew stronger and more frequent. Ash drifted onto the sugarcane, coating leaves and clogging gutters, while townspeople reported headaches, stinging eyes, and a metallic taste in the water. The warnings turned deadly on May 5th. At dawn, a wall of mud and volcanic debris, what scientists call a lahar, burst from the mountain's flank, racing down the Rivière Blanche. The torrent obliterated the Guerin sugar mill and swept away the main bridge, killing about 150 workers and their families in minutes. Refugees poured into Saint-Pierre desperate for shelter, their faces streaked with ash and fear. Police logs from that day show a surge in temporary housing permits and a spike in disorder as the city struggled to absorb the displaced. With the main bridge destroyed, every escape route west was cut off. Each new arrival pressed the city tighter against the volcano's shadow, and still, no evacuation order came. The evidence was everywhere: poisoned air, dead livestock, a river valley stripped bare, and now thousands more crowded into the city's heart. The danger was not hidden. It was written in every logbook, every funeral notice, every shattered bridge, and it was growing day by day. On May 3rd, Governor Louis Moutet convened the Commission de Sécurité Volcanique. The city was already choking on ash, livestock lay dead on the outskirts, and the lahar had just swept away families at the Guerin sugar mill. Yet inside the council chamber, the conversation turned not to evacuation, but to optics. The governor's telegrams, now preserved in the archives, reveal the real calculus. Any evacuation would be seen as weakness, a threat to the republic's image with the legislative election only days away. Minutes from the commission's meetings show a split. Dr. Hazan, the geologist, urged immediate flight, warning that tremors and sulfur readings exceeded safe limits. But the majority, led by engineer DuPont and backed by Moutet, insisted the city's stone buildings would hold, and that order must be maintained until the vote. On May 6th, the commission issued its final verdict, that the volcano posed no immediate threat, and life in Saint-Pierre should continue. The report, sent by telegraph to Paris, omitted dissenting voices and reassured the public that the city was safe. At the same time, council minutes record Moutet's private plea to delay any evacuation until after the election. Police were ordered to keep voting stations open and prevent residents from fleeing. Press editorials echoed the official line, warning that suspending the vote would invite chaos and shame. The population, swollen by thousands of refugees, was trapped by both the mountain and the machinery of colonial power. The decision to keep Saint-Pierre full and calm was not ignorance. It was a calculated risk, and the cost would soon be measured in lives. At 8:02 in the morning, Mount Pelee tore open. The city below had no warning, no chance. In that moment, the volcano released a pyroclastic surge, a ground-hugging cloud of ash, gas, and shattered rock hotter than any furnace. Numerical models and ship logs agree. The front edge of the flow hit speeds of 160 kilometers per hour, racing the 7 kilometers from crater to city in just about 2 minutes. Temperatures in the heart of the surge reached between 400 and 600 degrees Celsius. That is enough to ignite timber, melt lead, and strip flesh from bone in seconds. The physics offered no mercy. The blast moved in 2 phases, first a turbulent ash cloud, then the denser, deadlier nuée ardente hugging the ground. The pressure drop recorded by the French cruiser Le Bordelais was 12 hectopascals in under a minute, matching a sudden, violent displacement of air as the surge thundered through. Sea surface temperatures in the harbor spiked by 3 degrees as the cloud swept over the water, boiling the bay. Eyewitness accounts barely exist, but the timeline is clear. From 8:02 to 8:04, the entire city was engulfed. Escape was physically impossible. The surge did not pause, did not allow for a final breath. It erased Saint-Pierre with the certainty of physics, leaving behind only scorched stone and silence. The ruins of Saint-Pierre stretched from the harbor to the hillside, a city erased in less time than it takes to boil water. 5 merchant ships burned at anchor, their crews lost, cargoes of sugar and rum feeding fires that raged for days. Harbor logs, scorched but legible, list the names: L'Océanique, La Sainte Marie, and 3 more, each a floating tomb. The city's streets, once crowded with life, became a wasteland of scorched stone and twisted iron. The only sounds were the hiss of steam and the crackle of embers. Amid this devastation, a miracle surfaced in the prison ledger. Louis Auguste Cyperis, inmate 322, survived in a stone cell barely wide enough to stretch his arms. Medical notes recorded his burns and delirium, and they recorded his words. "I felt the heat like a furnace. The walls melted, yet a narrow void saved my life." Days later, a second survivor, Jean-Baptiste Roche, was pulled from a cellar beneath the market, coughing up ash but alive. Out of 30,000, only these two would walk again in daylight. The shockwaves of Paley's violence reached far beyond Martinique. Geologist Alfred Lacroix, sifting through the ash, wrote the phrase nuée ardente in his field notebook, naming the ground-hugging cloud that had killed so swiftly. His reports, published in 1903, gave science a new vocabulary for volcanic disaster. By July, the Colonial Council signed a decree. Saint-Pierre would never be rebuilt. The capital shifted to Fort de France, leaving the skeleton of a city as a warning carved in stone. The cost was not just measured in francs or ruined ships, but in the permanent loss of a community, its ambitions, its future, and its very place on the map. The ruins of Saint-Pierre are a monument to what happens when power values politics over lives. Today, officials still weigh warnings against public image. The next disaster waits for silence, and for leaders willing to let it happen. Complacency is the true threat. What would you demand?